My father lives in my mind as a cluster of quotations, a group of incidents. For example, breathe on me. You think you're a big shot, but you're nothing but a big shit. See what you've done, you've got me crying. I cannot for the life of me see him as I do my mother. Both of them loved to laugh. My father was often the life of the party. But my mother remains a clearer image of herself and is easier to describe. Sweet, patient, kind, loving, calming, a peacemaker. She passed away at age 82 when I was 44. My father is much, much harder to describe. He was physically strong. For the years of his life that I remember, he was a locomotive repairman for the Boston and Albany Railroad, a train line owned by the New York Central system then. He grew up in Western Massachusetts in fairly comfortable surroundings. I have no stories of him in torn clothes or going hungry for food or complaining about too much of the same food. Although there were times in Boston when I would complain that I was tired of spaghetti 3 nights in a row. We lived in an Irish battleship, a phrase used to describe a 3-decker apartment structure in Boston. Eventually, came to live there where my sister and her husband on the bottom floor, my mother's parents and her sister, Helen, in the middle floor apartment, and my father and I and my sister Jeanette on the top floor apartment. I look back on it as an Irish commune of sorts. Both he and my mother liked to drink, usually whiskey. One was called OFC, another Shenley's, another Canadian club. Always in moderation, always for a good time. Often they would play cards at the kitchen table with other family members, especially my father's younger brother, Alvin, who did not drink moderately, but he was very generous to us. First row seats at the ice capades as Christmas gifts, for example, every year. But he often needed help getting down the 3 flights of back stairs to the street after a holiday meal, and after much socializing, drinking, laughing, and roughhousing. Me on one side of him, when I was old enough, my father on the other, we would balance him between us, well, really wedge him between us as we made our way to the street in the car, in which my father would often drive him the short distance home. My father was not well educated. Legend has it that he dropped out of school after sophomore year, and somehow by the time he was in his 20s, he arrived in Boston with pretty much his clothes and his cello. He did have an older brother with a college education who was associated with Boston University, but that's pretty much the sum of what I remember about many early years. He was a funny guy though. He enjoyed a good joke, told a good joke, often risque, and loved to sing along with Rusty Warren. I'm not sure if I look out here and see any people that might remember Rusty Warren. I think it would not be unfair to define her as an entertainer, comedian, and stripper, who sang and worked in places that were already past their prime in the 1950s, specifically vaudeville. She recorded a 75 LP, I think that's what they were called, that delighted my father and was often played in our living room and sung along to. It went like this. Bounce your boobies, get into the swing. Bounce your boobies, the swing is everything. It makes no difference if they're big or small, as long as you, woo, give your all. Y'all always made my father laugh, and my mother say, "Oh, Lester." He was handsome, a rascal, a devil he might have been called. He was outgoing, genial, sometimes brash, and not one to shy away from a physical fight. One time he threatened to punch another driver in the nose, for some reason unknown to me. Unfortunately, I was sitting in the passenger seat as he leaned across me to shake his fist at the other driver while he followed the threatening phrase. Me, I was terrified by the whole rhubarb, and it remains clearly in my mind today as if it were yesterday. Maybe I was 7 or 8. He was generous. He offered me an allowance my senior year in place of paying work, so I could play high school football, something all my friends in high school urged me to do. You'll only be a senior once in life, he said. Today, though, this story focuses on a humorous and bad luck sexual moment of my life with him. I've had a lot of bad luck in that area. Maybe we all have. And it involves a famous, rather sleazy downtown theater in Boston called the Old Howard. A place, I later learned during its heyday, had been quite famous for quality entertainment, in addition to striptease. Apparently it was like the early world of entertainment in which the 1950s musical Gypsy was set. People are familiar. You gotta get a gimmick if you wanna get a hand. That's what it was like. As boys will do, one day some of my friends hatched a plot. We were all about 16. Let's skip school and catch an early afternoon show at the Old Howard. Something none of us had done. I asked my father to borrow the car. A two-tone green, beautiful, brand new 1957 Buick Supra. That was a car. It easily accommodated 4 or even 6 in the back seat, which was as big as a bedroom, and which was always highly in demand for double dates. We arrived on time, all 6 of us, and being loud and silly, made our way a bit late into the theater. We all sat close to the stage, and in the same row with me on the aisle. Dirty tellers and an MC were on stage, and some strippers, and one soon introduced herself as the featured act, and she was called Sally the Shape. Her quotation, unique to her performance, was, "Sally the Shape, 48 by the tape." The place smelled of popcorn and BO and beer and other bodily excrescences. And the floor was littered with empty popcorn boxes, candy wrappers, maybe even cigarette butts. Needless to say, it was not romantic in the least. As the strippers began, the audience, less than half full, listlessly began to hoot and holler. This went on for some 15 minutes before I felt an elbow in my ribs. I looked to my right to see all my friends slumped down in their seats. My friend nearest me elbowed me in the ribs and whispered in my ear, "Look behind you." How bad could it be? I'm watching the show, but I had the car. So I looked, and there, for some unknown reason, sat my 21-year-old sister and her husband, with another couple raucously enjoying the show. Well, I quickly slumped below the back of the chair too, hoping that by being silent, I would also be invisible. As I recall, we remained enjoying the show much more silently than before, but nevertheless enjoying it, but sneaking out before the lights went out. A few days later, as I was coming in from school, my father was taking the afternoon air on the 3rd floor porch and asked me where I had gone the other night. Nowhere, was my answer. Cleared the throat. You didn't get on to Scully Square, did you? No, I said, lying through my teeth. Then stupidly I said, why? He said that some of the guys at work had seen his car parked outside the Old Howard and were ribbing him mercilessly at work about how he spent his afternoons off. I said, oh, okay. And I quickly disappeared into the apartment. My sister and I did not talk about this until almost 50 years later. She said she never told him she'd seen me there, or that she had seen his car, or might have seen his car, or anything. So that, unbeknown to me, remained our secret. That was about a year before he passed away. Suddenly, after 3 weeks in the hospital nearby called St. Elizabeth's, we were all at his bedside when he passed, holding his hand and doing and saying things that people do in situations like that. Later, autopsy permission was granted, and it turns out he had undiagnosed juvenile diabetes and pancreatitis. At the wake, his younger brother, Alvin, the one we used to help down the stairs, threw himself on the casket, rocking it back and forth so that it seemed it might fall on the floor. My mother was composed and sad. My sister was distraught. And all his friends and family later in the day were just as movies and books have depicted an Irish post-wake scene. Drinking, crying, eating, laughing, remembering, hugging, and holding on. I remember holding his hand for a long time in the hospital and being frightened beyond belief, and wishing I had told him so many things. Confessed, apologized, been a better son, been less of a jerk and more of someone who he would have been proud of, and especially, oddly enough, of all the lies I had told over the years and all the bad behavior I wish I could forget, I wish I'd told him that I lied about seeing the strippers at the Old Howard. It was a feeling that grew into a mixture of guilt, embarrassment, shame, and anxiety that has remained with me to this day. And I hope with all my heart he would have thought it was something too minor to remember and could have said something like, "Son, it's okay."